This week, protests over the killing of George Floyd, who died in police custody in Minneapolis, brought people out all over the country. Joe Ingles and Andy Chow were at some of those demonstrations here in Ohio.
I hope the madness stops, the violence stops, police brutality stops.
I've spent a lot of time not really knowing how to feel the past couple of days, not really knowing how to support my community in a way that I feel is actually progressive. And I still can't say that I have those answers, but I know that the most important thing that anyone can do right now is be with their city and be with their communities, and that's why I'm here right now.
We were congregated right there at the corner of Broad and High, and it must have been close to curfew. And so the police officers that were on the horses began to come toward us and begin to shoot, whether it was tear gas, whatever it was. And I happened to get shot with a rubber bullet. And so, but I look at this is nothing compared to what our forefathers and our foremothers have gone through.
Hundreds showed up on Saturday, the third day of protests in Columbus. Police officers used bikes to try to form a fence to keep protesters out of the street in front of the State House. 28 windows and doors had been damaged the night before. The historic Ohio Theater just across the street was also boarded up from damage caused by overnight riots. And on this morning, the anger was palpable as people protested and marched. There were skirmishes. Water bottles were thrown at police. They responded with pepper spray. Some hit Democratic U.S. Congresswoman Joyce Beatty.
Something happened with a young gentleman, and he was thrown to the ground by one of the officers. And then there were some sisters there who were clearly emotional and exercising their freedom of speech very clearly. And the next thing we knew it, there was an officer using his bike to push her back. I was next to her. My arms are up in the air trying to grab her. I'm saying this is wrong. Let's not excite the crowd. And then a young lady is being pepper sprayed. And unfortunately, I learned pepper spray is not one direction.
Then, a few hours later,
I am this afternoon calling to service the Ohio National Guard to protect the citizens of the state of Ohio. Further, at the request of Mayor Ginther and the Chief of Police, I'm ordering the State Highway Patrol to also enforce and help enforce the criminal laws within the city of Columbus.
But we're now at a point where we can no longer tell the difference between who is protesting for change and an end to racism and who has only chaos and destruction in mind. In addition to the activation of the National Guard, we are implementing a citywide curfew from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. beginning tonight.
The National Guard was also asked to help quell unrest in Cleveland. And there were protests in Cincinnati. Over the next few days, the movement spread into smaller communities and suburbs, including the wealthy and mostly white suburb of Powell.
But I don't hate police. I do not hate policemen. I hate bad people.
In nearby Dublin, hundreds also rallied and marched, with police on bikes holding back and watching the crowds. Oftentimes, the suburban protests struck a solemn tone. In Delaware, there was also a prayer vigil, and a coalition there is starting to look ahead and coming up with ideas to address racism and injustice on a long-term basis.
How do we deconstruct these systems that continually perpetuate racism and white supremacy and privilege? So I think that's an important step for us going forward.
Joe Ingles, State House News Bureau.
I'm Andy Chow.
In downtown Columbus, at the busy intersection of Broad Street and High Street, dozens of protesters are lined up to hold signs and encourage passers-by to join in their cause. It's around noon on Sunday, and what you're seeing is the beginning of the fourth straight day of protests. The huge groups that attract the most attention tend to accumulate over time, with the dozens becoming hundreds. A block away, another group identifying itself as a Christian-based demonstration is also walking to the State House in what they say is a protest against injustice and hate. They greet Ohio State Highway Patrol troopers set up around Capitol Square. Then they hold a prayer around the Seal of Ohio on the West Plaza. Eventually, these two groups converged, mashing into one large demonstration. Some in the crowd walked down the highway patrol line, shaking the troopers' hands, one protester saying they're here for peace. As the temperature continued to climb, some in the group were spotted handing out water, hand sanitizer, and masks, since the state is still fighting the spread of coronavirus. Many marchers then headed to Columbus Police Headquarters to continue a loud but nonviolent demonstration, and then circled back to the State House. 1 block north, the Ohio National Guard is set up. They've been deployed to Columbus and Cleveland to assist local law enforcement in their efforts to secure the demonstrations. As the light starts to fade, the tone of the protest turns. Police arrive at Broad and High and warn the crowd to disperse. As Adora Namigade from WOSU in Columbus reports, the tension started to build throughout the evening.
That's proven true. We just got tear gas. Some people are throwing water bottles.
Police enforce the city's 10 p.m. curfew Sunday and for the next few nights, pepper spraying those who don't leave for home, including some reporters who are exempt from the curfew. In the light of day, the change is obvious. There's been lots of damage to the State House and other buildings, many of which now have plywood wrapped around windows and doors. But there's also been help, as people, some of whom were protesting hours before, pick up the city, carrying bags and brooms. And artists have started to use the plywood as another platform to carry out the message of love and hope. Andy Chow, State House News Bureau.